Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Modern Sales Pros Masterclass and live Q&A about getting ahead with competitive intelligence, sponsored by the wonderful team at Workato. And as folks are getting in and getting settled here, we have a little poll that we're going to pop up. And we do want to take a chance to get to meet our panelists. Now we've got one new panelist and one returning panelist. So Justin, let's start with you. You're an old hat. You've been an MSP member for a while, but we always want to know from our panelists, anything new, any new hobbies, skills that you've picked up since the start of the coronavirus pandemic?
Yeah, I I've been taking a lot of walks in in nature as much as possible, and I have two kids who are 8 and 9 who are incredibly huge nature enthusiasts.
And you're muted. It's probably the most common phrase in 2020.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, seriously. I was saying that I have two young kids, 8 and 9, and they are huge nature enthusiasts. And I do a lot of walks because just getting outside is important. And so I think I've learned a lot about birds and things of that nature through them and all the things they've told me, because it's like they're amazing at how much knowledge they retain. So I feel like I've learned a lot more about nature in the course of the pandemic.
That's pretty awesome. It's good to get outside and you're in the Bay Area, right?
Yes, I live in Half Moon Bay.
All right. And folks in the chat panel, do just let us know where you're calling in from. It's always good to get a sense of where we're at. And then we have a first timer here as well, Vikas. Welcome. Thank you. Thank you for joining us. But it's a tradition. Any new hobbies or skills that you've picked up since the start of the pandemic?
It's a good question. I was kind of thinking a little bit about this. I think for me, and Justin probably can attest to this, I'm a big fan of my hair. Cutting my own hair is definitely a new skill of mine. It's taken quite a bit of practice. Some challenges. My brother's actually really good at it, so I'm kind of taking his lead, but that's been one of the areas I've spent a lot of time over the past 12 months, actually, cutting my own hair.
I've got a lot of questions about that. You know, obviously don't got a lot going on up top here. How do you do it, right? Because it looks like you got some good lettuce up top.
It's the angle of the mirrors and just kind of taking your time with it. So it's just practice. Practice makes perfect. It's like competitive intelligence. Practice.
It's just like, it's you know, whether or not you came here for competitive intelligence, we got hair care tips, we got outside bird culture, aviary stuff, and we'll do a little competitive intelligence too. All right, folks, we're going to jump in because we've got two amazing panelists and we've got a relatively short window of time. We want to get these folks back and rocking and rolling with their day. Before we jump into our programming today, though, today's event is hosted by the team at Modern Sales Pros. For those of you who don't know, Modern Sales Pros is the world's largest community for revenue leaders. So those are folks in sales management, revenue and sales operations, and the related supporting disciplines. We have about 22,000 members. And one of the great parts about our community is it exists to help our members answer questions they'd otherwise struggle to solve on their own, like how the heck do I get started with competitive intelligence? We do programming like this just about every week, and we do hope to get back to in-person events real soon in the future. One of the great parts about the community as well is when you ask a question in our online forum, it's not just one or two high growth SaaS companies. You get perspective from across the ecosystem of amazing, long, big companies, folks like Adobe, and also folks that are at high growth startups. So a really great way to help you up level your career. For those of you who aren't members, you'll be invited to join afterwards. But today's programming actually wouldn't be possible without the sponsorship of the team at Workato. And I'll hand it off to Justin to say just a few words about Workato.
Sure. We are an enterprise automation platform. And so basically what that means is that we help to automate a lot of the otherwise manual tasks that simply are frustrating for a lot of companies. And by doing that, we allow people to get back to the work that is potentially more exciting or more strategic. So that's what Workato does.
And we're excited to have you here. And Justin's being a little bit bashful. He's been a long-term member of Modern Sales Pros as well. But gentlemen, let's actually get to know you both a little bit. You know, this topic comes up quite a bit. How do I use competitive intelligence? What is it? Justin, why don't you give us a little bit of your background and then we can hand it off.
Sure. Like some of the folks that are in sales ops, I have a bit of a diverse background, I guess, but it's gone into, started in finance, then consulting, and then I made my way into the kind of sales ops, sales strategy space. Previously, before Workato, I was at Medallia, and that's where Vikas and I worked together. And then I think just a tidbit on this topic and sort of why it's so important and why it's near and dear to me is just because it's in very few deals, I feel like, where a prospect isn't potentially considering what their other options are. And so competitive intelligence, if you really think about the holistic nature of it, is not only competing, in one-off deals against known competitors, but also knowing how to articulate you and your value prop vis-a-vis the other alternatives. Some of which, of course, always are just to do nothing, and which sometimes is the biggest competitor of all. So I think gathering the intelligence, figuring out how to leverage it and scale it, figuring out how to make sure that it is more programmatic and sort of always on versus just sort of a la carte and, more of project-based of work is key for sort of any organization that helps to stay ahead, and particularly ahead of the competition. So I'll go into more, but Vikas has a ton on this too. So I'm anxious to hear what he has to say too.
Yeah, and Vikas, please do introduce yourself. I think it's the first time we've had on an enterprise product marketing lead. So what the heck does that mean? And I got your background already, but share it with the community because I think you're going to be great here.
Yeah, sure. So, it's interesting how I kind of entered into product marketing. I started off in consulting in my first part of my career, joined Medallia in 2014, and held a couple of roles in both sales and customer success. So working on the front line with our sales reps, with our customer success managers, and being customer facing really helped me kind of understand what was actually happening in the market. It actually led to my interest and passion in competitive intelligence. It's the best way to influence and arm your sellers, your sales teams, your customer success folks to understand how to better drive wins within your organization. And that's actually how I entered into product marketing. So for the past a little over 2 years now, I've been leading our product marketing team at Slack, really focused on competitive intelligence, finding ways to programmatically scale what's happening in our markets, supporting our sales teams, but also supporting the broader organization, our product managers, our executive teams, on using kind of competitive intelligence to really think about proactive strategy when it comes to our growth as an organization.
And congratulations! It's a little teeny Slack acquisition. Congratulations on that one. But folks, we're gonna jump in here today. Please, just 2 housekeeping notes. First things first, please do use the Q&A panel. We've got these great panelists here. We may want to follow up with you afterwards. And then secondly, before somebody asks, the recording will be available after the event, so we got you covered there. With that, I think we started on this a little bit when we got going, but Justin, let's start with you on this. Like, why the heck is this important? Like, why do we have to worry about what our competitors are up to? I know it sounds a little bit basic, but it's actually pretty dang important.
Yeah, I mean, I think for the one hand, like I said, in most markets, you're going to be facing competition. And like I said, some of the competition is for them to just solve it on their own, and to continue maybe do nothing. And so I think being able to articulate your value, how and why someone should choose you over, doing whatever they're doing today, or a potential competitive offering, is key for winning, again, in most all markets. And I think like the thing is that I think why it's important is because of that, because it's so crucial to winning and growing a company. But I think it's also important because what I've seen is a lot of companies tend to underinvest or under resource this function for quite some time. I mean, I've seen larger companies during my consulting days where they probably weren't really focused as much as they should be. So I think then it becomes, okay, so if it's going to be traditionally undersourced, then how do you either have someone who does this well as part of their job, and how do they do that? Or how do you have maybe a team of one, which Vikas knows from starting at Medallia, to really build a function and then scale it? And what does that look like? And how do you use technology to potentially help you? So I just think that it's an incredibly important function. And I think the last thing I'd say is that no company has a flawless product. And so being able to learn and understand where your blind spots are and where, you know, the market is moving, and maybe where your competitors potentially are innovating and that you should consider are key things just to understand. And then it's up to you to decide how to act.
There's a lot of discipline in that. We've had folks on talking about, you know, cold calling and sales development, how even if you're using a competitor, there's a whole bunch of discovery. There's almost a separate script that you can go down there to learn some of those insights. How have you seen, you know, Justin, organizations really collect and kind of operationalize this type of information? Because it feels
Yeah.
like it's kind of everywhere.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think it's a great place if you're new to this or you just kind of want to take an audit of how you're doing. Is just ask yourself, like, what are the most important competitive information or piece of information that we should be collecting? And I would structure it ideally into quantifiable information and qualitative information. So structured and non-structured. You know, so structured good examples would be like, how many competitive deals are we in? Which competitors are showing up most? So that's literally just like being able to tag competitors to us. But then the other stuff that's super important would be, you know, questions like, why are we losing? And I'm a big fan. I think there's a lot of people in MSP that like this too. I'm a big fan of the like double response Salesforce categories. So you have like a loss reason, which is like a drop down, but then there's like loss details that must be, so you get both, you know, sort of, you know, quantitative and qualitative. But then the last thing I would say, just, I could talk a long time, and if there's more, I can go into it. But the last thing I think is crucial, if you're thinking about where do I start? So yeah, first start with what data, and then map out process to go get it. And I could provide some more suggestions of key things, but is start early your win-loss interviews, and figure out who's going to do it. Ideally, you should probably try to spread the wealth. I think there's, you know, sales and marketing and sales leaders tend to be, you know, good folks to do this. But so that's step one, is get the information. But then that's only step one. Then you have to sort of synthesize it, and then you have to kind of cascade it so that it can be turned into action. And you know, people have different cadences. Usually quarterly is a good opportunity to pull up and look at that information to see, you know, how have trends changed, things of that nature. But I am just a huge fan of the competitive intelligence you can get from just understanding, what did we do right, what did we do wrong, why did we win, why did we lose, and what do we learn from it? So I would start with some of those fundamentals, and then you can add.
That's a great, having a really good foundation of data helps. But Vikas, how do you take that data and apply it? Like, what do I do with it once I kind of have it?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think one of the things that we've seen really successful with win-loss programs is you're able to really change your messaging and foundational kind of marketing content, right? So when we think about win-loss programs, both at Medallion and at Slack, what we're really trying to understand is that outside-in perspective, voice of the customer. And so if we can figure out what messaging is actually resonating with our customers, what differentiation, for example, we're able to iterate on our messaging much more effectively and more quickly. And that comes back to the feedback loop that kind of Justin's alluding to with the sales organization, which is, it's a big lift and ask your sales managers, your sales reps to fill out win-loss reports in Salesforce. So as a marketing lead, my goal is really to put together what is the best content that we can then deliver for our reps, for our internal teams, to make that information as effective as possible. A repository of customer quotes, customer stories, working with our customer marketing team. It's a much more effective way to scale out and create that air cover from a marketing standpoint based off of what's happening in the market itself. So again, it's leveraging the voice of the customer for your wins, creating that air cover for your sellers to kind of take that to market. And then for the losses, really being able to instrument that information with your various internal stakeholders. One of the things that we really kind of focused on as a product-led organization at Slack, specifically from our product-led growth perspective, is we want to be competitor aware, but still customer obsessed, right? And our win-loss program is very much focused on what are our customers actually saying? What is the reality of the market? Let's take that information, synthesize, and then share it out with the broader stakeholders. So there's definitely a balancing act there.
Well, it feels like that's part of the art of it too, right? You can look at what everybody else is doing, and then along the way lose who you are. And how did that? What was that term that you used again? Competitive aware.
You're competitor aware, customer obsessed. David Shelhace, our chief legal officer, talks about it quite a bit. It's part of our onboarding program for every single sales new hire, which is, yes, competitors are out there. They're going to be in the market. We're dealing with some large ones in our collaboration space. But if you put the customers first, you're always going to win on that customer obsession, right? That is going to be the key differentiator for us as an organization of truly understanding our customers' outcomes and their business priorities.
I feel like that's a really smart, especially when you start to think about onboarding, right? You can, reps don't have infinite time. And if I can kind of qualify you out because I can say, hey, you're not the right fit for us, there's these guys down the road that do it. That's very interesting. I like that.
Yeah.
So, Justin, you started to hit on this a little bit before. You're talking about structured and unstructured data and insights. Can you talk through that a little bit more at depth for folks? As the majority of our audience today was like, well, hey, at least we've got a competitive thing, kind of ish.
Yeah. So this is something that we've spent some time on as our own company, and we wanted to there are at least a couple things that we wanted to get better at. And so one of them was just understanding we feel like more of our deals are competitive, but our reps are busy and they aren't necessarily Salesforce obsessed. So always capturing the competitive data as early in the sales cycle as we would like is a challenge. We usually always find out about it in at the proposal stage, but that's like mid-stage. And there's a lot of this sales science data shows that a lot of your competitive, importance of competing actually takes place early in the sales cycle. Mm-hmm. So surfacing the competitors, being able to position yourself well against the competitors. A lot of the battle actually takes place before you get to the bake-off. So getting that information sooner in the sales cycle, critical for win rates. So that's number one. Number two is we felt like, well, gosh, we actually have done a lot of win-loss interviews, understanding of our competitive differentiations. We actually feel like we have some pretty good content, but it's not being leveraged that well. Everyone's like, wait, where do I find the battle card again? Or like for the 19th time, here it is. And, but that happens like everywhere. It's literally everywhere.
High growth startup, right? Where
yeah. So we basically at Workato, we kind of have this philosophy that like we want to stop trying to force sales reps to do things that are unnatural for how they work. Instead, we want to use and build workflows that allow them to just get the stuff they want in the way they already like to work. So that was a really long wind up to say, here's what we did. Basically, we created an automation that leveraged the technology that we have in the tech stack to make it way easier for our reps to tag competitive deals very early on. That allowed us to do a number of cool things. Number one, we got way more competitive intelligence. Like we used, our number of deals that had competitors tagged to them used to be something like less than 30% early in the sales cycle. Now it's over 70%. That's huge for us. Just to be able to understand way earlier who we're competing and what we do with that. And then I'll show you kind of what we built and how we did it, just because it could be hopefully spark some creativity. But I think it is really important to think through your tech stack and how you can better leverage it to automate some of this. Because like I said, it's really hard to get reps to always remember to do some manual Salesforce tasks. So I'll just take a second and I can actually show you guys a little bit of what we did. And perhaps it might be interesting to folks. So kind of, appropriate that it was a combination of Workato and Slack is what we did. But let me just quickly share it or present it for you guys. So basically we built something called a sales intelligence bot. And what it combined essentially Slack, Gong, and Salesforce. And what would happen is we would know right at the end of a call, a rep would get tagged or get pinged. It says like, hey, you just had a call with say like Giant Tiger. And we know that some competitors were mentioned. The reason why we know that is because we built some automations that basically says whenever the prospect, so not the AE or someone from Workato, mentions a competitor, we're going to give you the option to tag it. So in this case, there were 3 competitors mentioned and they get this tag immediately. And then what they can then do is, like I said, it surfaces the competitors. And if they want to, with one click, they just go and they can add it to the Salesforce op. Well, that just makes it it's a lot easier for them to do it. They don't have to type anything. It's just done for them, super easy. But we're also kind of on a mindset that like, sales ops is a support role. Like our function is to make sellers more effective. So I believe very much in like a give get type of thing. If I'm going to ask them for something, I should better give them value too, which is kind of what we're trying to do and solve that issue where like we basically disseminate the battle cards right to them. So they can just click here and go into Guru and get the battle cards for any of our competitors. We just listed one here for the demo of MuleSoft. And so that way it's timely and they get it when they need it. But then the other thing that we did, again, I love the kind of idea from customer obsessed, is like our customers are AEs. So we asked them like, how can we make this better? They're like, well, hey, in competitive deals, like typically the way I do is like, I'll go and I'll look at our content, then I'll just like go talk to other AEs who recently won deals. Cause like, I find that that's really useful. So we're like, all right, well, why don't we make that easier for them? So we built that in the next thing where we basically said, hey, show me recent competitive wins against this competitor. And I can just click down and select a competitor. And then I can see like, hey, here are some recent competitive wins. And I can go talk to Josh or Boaz or Jeff and go read about these deals if I want to. Again, this was not a very difficult thing for us to build or to do. But I think it's an example of how, number one, I'm not having to prompt these people every time. I'm not having to find this stuff. It's automated. It's in the background. It's always on, always working, which allows us to scale. And as a kind of like a one-man shop or whatever, it allows us to actually be way more professional while still resourcing this correctly. Maybe not building out a huge team given, the situation. So this is kind of an example, I think, of what I would find is a little bit more kind of intelligent ways to collect data and do it at scale and allow also you to leverage that data in timely ways to have cool competitive programs. Sorry for the long windup, but I thought maybe that's helpful.
No, I think it speaks to how a couple parts on this, right? We're going to talk a little bit more about like how to actually get started, how to build it, how to implement it. But one of the things, Justin, that you said on that, aside from having some pretty slick ways to make it easy for reps to capture this information, the other part that you mentioned is it's like, you have to be massively efficient, whether you're in RevOps or whether you're running competitive intelligence. You're never going to be resourced with a dozen, 2 dozen, 3 dozen people. And certainly if you've got 3 dozen people in your compete org, you're probably at a very large, very, very complex organization. But Vikas, I'd love to get you going a little bit to talk about, because you've been the team of half and the team of one, and we've got folks that are still figuring out. How have you seen folks be able to get started with this and get to that point where, like you said, you've got this big backlog of customer stories available?
Yeah, so I think it's really about prioritization, right? So really understanding first and foremost, when I was at Medallion, team of half, and it was a night job for me when I first started. I was still doing customer success with my team over there. It's really about how do you prioritize what are the most important things for the sales organization, right? What are the things that are going to be most effective for them? And for us, it was just getting a baseline of capturing the data and the insights, understanding what was actually happening with our competitive differentiation, who are our competitors, what does the market landscape look like, putting together a set of pieces of content, slides, whatever it may be, in a central repository for that information. I think of competitive intelligence as this kind of 3 structured tier, right? There's capturing data and insights. That's kind of tier 1. It's the baseline. Once you get that foundational aspect going, you're able to rev on that relatively quickly. The second pillar for me is really around supporting the sales organization, for me personally, and for any competitive intelligence team. Being able to build the right kind of content, connect with the right kind of systems and data to kind of feed that information out to the reps. And then third is kind of the proactive aspect of competitive intelligence, which is how do you inform go-to-market strategy, corporate strategy, M&A strategy with those competitive insights. And it is a bit of a crawl, walk, run. And frankly, you have to earn that third pillar, which is being at the table, sharing those kind of proactive messages with the broader organization. It starts by getting the data and insights right first and foremost. And so for us, what I've done in my role in kind of at Slack as well as at Medallia is going to our sales ops team, going to our sales enablement team and listening, right? Sitting in front of our reps, hearing from them, what are the challenges that they're running into in the market? What kind of content is going to be the most effective for them in these sales conversations? Is it stories? Is it ROI calculators? Is it just getting a baseline understanding of, wait, Slack can do this and this other competitor can do X, Y, Z? There's a bit of myth versus reality as well too. I would encourage folks that are starting off their competitive intelligence functions is there's a lot of noise out there in the market, a lot of noise. It's very easy to get caught up in kind of chasing every little detail out there, Reddit posts, YouTube videos, etc. Focus on the actual signals, right, that are coming from your sales organization and what's actually going to convert ACV and impact ACV. As a team of one or a team of half, that's the best way for you to kind of keep your sanity and also find ways to scale out the stuff that's actually working when it's time to scale your organization. And then for those of you that are looking to kind of build out a broader competitive intelligence team, once you have those wins early on, the business case you're able to make to your sales leadership team, your sales op leadership team for additional headcount, frankly, becomes a lot more easier, which is always a good thing, right? That business case building is critical.
Where, and I want to double click into that a little bit. Where does that typically incubate, right? You mentioned that you were kind of customer success moonlighting as a competitive person. Is it an ops? Does it come out of ops? Does it come out of solution engineering? Like, where have you seen it get started? And Justin, I want your perspective on this as well.
Yeah, it's a great question. I've actually seen it live in a lot of different places. I've spent a lot of time with other competitive teams across large enterprise SaaS companies, smaller enterprise SaaS companies. I think for any competitive team to be really successful, it doesn't necessarily have to sit within one specific department, but you do need that cross-functional tiger team approach where there's buy-in across enablement, ops, and the sales organization. Having it sit within product marketing, frankly, this is the first time it's sit within product marketing at Slack, I think is really effective because it allows for that outside-in perspective to live within your marketing organization. Everybody on my team, frankly, has ACV that they need to meet on a quarterly basis from a quota perspective. I expect my PMMs to be engaging on deals and hearing directly from our customers. If we can't pitch a winning narrative, we have to go back to the drawing board. So there's pros and cons of having it sit within various departments. I think that access of kind of the political capital across sales, marketing, and customer success is critical. Having it sit within a corporate strategy team could be effective as well, but it really does vary on where your organization is from a maturity standpoint.
No, I also think I like that point that you said around it's kind of have the interdisciplinary move between the teams and be able to have some political goodwill to burn with marketing, sales, maybe customer success, maybe even engineering in some instances.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what Vikas said. I think as a sales ops professional and some of the people who are on here, if they're in sales ops, I think it's your core job within this discipline of competitive intelligence to make sure that things are wired correctly to capture the data. So if it's, win-loss rates for competitors, that you've got things set up correctly so you can do that, as well as just that you are at least understanding of the process. You don't need to be the person conducting all the win-loss interviews, but that a process exists, it's being executed, it has owners, and that the insights and data is being captured and disseminated. And sometimes the ops person can be in charge of helping that, but I would sometimes even easier to say it could be more on me to come up with the what is happening. So, hey, we're seeing competitors go up. We're seeing more of these competitors. We're seeing our win-loss rates do this. We're seeing, if we look at various revenue bands or ARR bands, here's what we see happening. But then maybe the why, I think, can then come from either going and talking to your actual AEs, your solution consultants, right? Pre-sales knows a ton always, or the product marketing team, right? Can be really, really into the why and understanding, here's how things are facing off vis-a-vis our competitive differentiation, maybe how we need to improve how we articulate it. So I think there's a lot of folks that have a hand in making a great program, but I think the folks who sort of sit in seats like me, it's really key that like Vikas said, that foundational level layer of having the right data, that you're kind of on top of that.
I think that's something. We've got a good live question coming in from Kevin Donahoe in Colorado, and it's two-parter. Let's start with the first part because I think it's a little bit more science than art, and I think the second part gets into kind of the meat of the matter. But Justin, how as an individual seller, and what's my role in getting that competitive information back from the front lines, or as a frontline sales manager or frontline sales development manager?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I think it's a key part of anybody in sales ops to make sure you have pretty strong relationships with frontline sellers. and they feel comfortable pinging you or calling you or whatever, and just like saying like, hey, I want to tell you some things. At the same time, AEs get busy, and I think it needs to be on you as the person in sales ops too, that you just pick up the phone, maybe if you have some time while walking or driving or whatever it might be, like schedule in time to do kind of spontaneous calls with AEs, and get different perspectives, because different people see different competitors depending on what market they're in. And so I think it's important that you get a diverse input. I think those are all good things to do. They don't scale super well, but they're still super important. The things that you can do to scale a little bit better is to do things like, having, kind of regular quarterly surveys from your field, and asking them, and then gathering that data and analyzing it. That gets a much wider breadth of information, maybe not always the depth, but it's still very good. And then I think, also we try to give highlight highlight deals in our Friday or weekly sales calls. And when we do that, that's another great opportunity for dialogue and discussion about competitive dynamics or just market dynamics, right? So someone might bring somebody, and in the context of telling their story, they'll also maybe say, or here's how I competed, or here's some things that I was facing. That surfaces it. And I think that sometimes prompts further reps even after that meeting to kind of submit feedback. So those are some things that we do.
I think that's great perspective on the capture front. I want to get into the second part because I think it's pretty interesting. And because you mentioned this, there's lots of noise out there, right? You go on G2 Crowd, there's 85 competitors for your little slice of heaven. How, as a rep or as a frontline manager, do you kind of filter through that noise to make sure that when you're going back, you're not crying wolf, right? It's not like, oh, I lost this deal because we didn't have feature X. Like, how do you, and especially as a frontline or a first-time manager, I think it's a challenge. So how can you as a rep or as a frontline manager really make sure the feedback that you're delivering back to competitive intelligence, enablement, sales ops, wherever it lives, is like actually impactful and valuable, as opposed to just bitching about a feature that the product doesn't have?
Yeah, I think for one of the things that we found to be really effective, coming back to the scale piece, is we collect a lot of feedback from our frontline reps in terms of deals that they're engaging in publicly in our Slack channels, right? It's transparent, it's visible. The entire organization can kind of see that feedback coming in real time. What we found to be really effective in terms of kind of filtering out the noise is really focusing on where do we want our sellers to go in their sales conversations? What kind of conversations do we expect them to have with their customers around value-based messaging, value-based selling, et cetera? What we're able to do is kind of reverse engineer. If there's a product feature or a gap that's missing, let's actually track that over time, right? Let's build some dashboards to see how much ACV is being impacted over time, and are we actually seeing a fundamental shift in kind of the conversations that are taking place in our market with our customers on the frontline perspective. The challenge here, I think, is it's important to give your reps the space to kind of share what they're hearing in the market, because it's important to kind of get that conversation going. The key really is, can you actually start to see patterns across all the various inputs that are coming in? So one of the things that we do that really helps kind of filter out that noise is, yes, we get firsthand deal experience from frontline folks, but as our managers and our sales management team looks at is, what are we hearing from the product marketing organization, the product management organization, in terms of where our product roadmap is headed? And are there ways for us to close that gap naturally through product innovation, et cetera, right? So it's a little bit of expectation setting as well, which is, yes, these deals can be tough, but when we dig into the personas, the actual buyer profiles, we're able to filter down exactly what happened and do an anatomy of a deal. And oftentimes what we realize is there are competitive dynamics, but the challenge in that deal wasn't necessarily this massive competitor coming in with XYZ feature. It was lack of executive champion or not going high enough within the account. And that's a different framing of a conversation that you have then with the frontline rep in terms of coaching and empowerment for the next deal that individual focuses on. So it's a bit of a kind of, yes, we hear you, but let's dig a little bit deeper in terms of the conversations you're having with your customers and where can we improve upon in that entire sales motion.
No, I think having it modeled and being disciplined about that, because to your point, right? Oh yeah, no, maybe that's what you heard, that you lost because of feature X, but in reality, we got blocked at the CFO that you never talked to. Justin, in your earlier days at Workato, as things were kind of getting going, how much of the sales process did you have really locked before you started to do some of the competitive work?
I mean, I feel like I feel like the sales process is something that we're always kind
How
of
long is a piece of string, Justin? Come on.
yeah. I mean, but I would say this: we we probably started pretty early with general competitive intelligence, but I would admit very much that I was another one of the people that I say happens so often, where it started very much as a project-based effort when I first was going, just because there were so many things that I was trying to get my head around as I was getting up to speed as the head of sales ops. And so, I'd spend a little time to be like, oh, okay, what are our competitors? Which competitors? How's our run rate? And they're like, okay, I'll come back to that in another quarter and check to see if anything's changed. But I hadn't built anything that was truly going to be scalable or always on or things of that nature. And that's probably how most people will start. I think that we have been, the challenge though, is that a lot of sales orgs are oftentimes innovating on their go-to-market. And when you do, you might get a new channel, or you might get a new motion, or you might get a new product that changes the way you sell. And so whenever you do that, you kind of have to pay attention to new competitors that are surfacing, or new ways to compete vis-a-vis that motion or channel or segment or whatever. So it's kind of something that, like I said, you always have to pay attention to. But I think, like, I started off by talking about like what are the core things, and I would keep to those. And then I'd say is just like, whenever in doubt, always follow the money. So seriously, like wherever there is the most largest amount of ARR or ACV, or however you want to call it, is coming into or flowing through, like start there. and because there's always tons of stuff that you could do. So just, it's our job to always be ruthless in how we prioritize. And so that's kind of what I'd say is like, yeah, there might be some plays that you're innovating, but go and really make sure that you have hardened and better processes in the place that are core to how you compete and core to how you make your number.
I think there's a whole separate conversation we could have about the feedback loop from sales to products to actual product releases, and the knife fights that happen over that. I want to move in. We spent a lot of time talking about collection and kind of how to scale it, but we haven't really talked too much about how to use it, which is really the art of it with competitive intelligence. And because I want to start with you here, what are some things that you see people either really, really goof up when they've got a good piece of competitive intel, or what are some really common applications you've seen that folks are doing reasonably well, or things that they should think about before using competitive intelligence?
Yeah, so I'll start with the challenges that people run into when using competitive intelligence. Sometimes we've seen reps bring in competitive intelligence or too early on in the sales cycle. They actually introduce the competitor into the deal because they jump the gun, right? Because they haven't done the right kind of upfront discovery. And they start to see these conversations that creates doubt in the customer's own mind or the prospect's own mind of, well, wait a minute, should I be evaluating another tool altogether? That wasn't my initial reasoning, but it's introducing kind of the competitor or the competitive dynamics too early on into a sales conversation. I think where I've seen folks become really, really effective with competitive intelligence is if you're an account executive or even on the sales engineering side, is being just dangerous enough to understand what are the fundamental differentiation from a product capability standpoint and tying it to use cases that customer cares about, right? I think of competitive intelligence as being this kind of foundational layer that sits across all of your kind of product marketing messages and your sales motion. If you're able to speak to the value that your product's able to deliver and highlight without kind of calling out a competitor explicitly in terms of where the value is going to come from your specific solution, those are some of the most successful ways to kind of have that competitive conversation with the customer by not coming across overly aggressive or kind of defensive in many ways, right? So one of the things that we try to do here within Slack is really create messaging and content one-pagers that are not necessarily overly, hey, Slack versus XYZ competitor, but more around here's what Slack can do for sales, Slack for customer support, but then still laddering in our key differentiation and our capabilities that really bring out things that no other competitor in the market can actually do for that organization, given their product capabilities. And we've really worked with our enablement team to arm our sellers on that talk track, on that positioning, to find ways to pivot away at the right time. And so this is kind of this like nice balance of, Yes, be dangerous enough to go into a one-on-one conversation with your champion to go deep on a specific product differentiation area, but always find the right altitude. Maybe it's 20,000 foot or 40,000 foot to be able to focus on that kind of value orientation at the end of the day. That's the fine line.
No, and I was just thinking about that too. If you spend too much time talking about a competitor, you're almost doing their job for them. One question we had, and this was more a bunch in registration, but because I want you to double click into this, you mentioned that hey, some of this stuff is customer ready materials that are used in the sales process. Could you walk through a couple examples of that? Or those like maybe buying guides for sales? Like what can you frame that a little bit more for our audience?
Yeah, so we have a few different types of competitive content that our sales folks use. One, we have worked with our sales engineering team to put together an evaluation criteria guide. So really helping brand new prospects who are kind of greenfield to the collaboration space understand here are the types of capabilities you should be looking at to think about a holistic collaboration platform for your organization. That, of course, is framed in our own worldview that highlights our differentiation. It highlights use cases that accelerate and showcases Slack's strongest capabilities. Other pieces of content that we use as we think about kind of the sales funnel is like, what are we going to use for kind of stage one, stage two, but more focused on later stage conversations with champions specifically. A lot of our customers are being asked within the IT team or within engineering teams to highlight the value of Slack and defend the value of Slack against free or bundled solutions to the executive leadership team. What we've actually worked on is putting together sets of ROI calculators, one-pagers that highlight kind of our key differentiation, and most importantly, tight set of executive level slides that anybody could kind of plug and play and have that conversation with their champion. We really want to arm our customers to tell our story about why Slack in their own words. We don't want to be the ones going up to the CFO to defend our own product. We want to arm our champions. So the way we build our content is really around third-party external validation, whether it's through industry analyst reports, customer validation, customer win stories, going deep on product capabilities and gaps for the more technical audiences. So it's one of the things that we found really most to be really effective. I'll just slight tangent here. The shift to remote work, people are really tired of reading documentation left and right. We've actually started investing in short form, 30-second, 1-minute videos. I work with a dedicated sales engineer who's phenomenal at this, where he's able to go deep on a specific differentiation topic, make it fun, make it quick, make it memorable, rooted in customer stories. That then becomes this living, breathing asset that our sales team can then use to share with the champion or even share with an executive buyer to really showcase the value in the differentiation of Slack. So we're really investing in kind of the video side of things because we've just found that to be a lot more of an effective content type.
And you see that too sometimes in product marketing as well, where they'll be, maybe in an emerging market, right? We'll do a whiteboard Wednesday to talk about this concept that's just kind of new to the space here. Justin, I know you've probably got a lot of thoughts here.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think all of the content that Vikas is talking about is just critical. I think so two things. Number one, companies do better by having a fewer sets of really great assets than a lot of mediocres, but I see a lot of people tending to go towards the second choice. But the other thing I wanted to talk about is actually the role of ops in what Vikas said, right? Because like, I think a critical component of ops is like at the first, yeah, I get the data, but then how do you be intelligent about knowing where a seller is in their journey and then partnering with all of the wonderful product marketing and sales enablement content to get it to them at the right time. Now there's some software out there that that's kind of what they're trying to do. But I actually think that like there are some ways that you can do it, even kind of hacking it together yourself. If like what we look at through some automations is if you essentially know the persona and the potentially like department that you're having and the key use case, and then you can clearly have content that's tagged to that, then that's a good ways that you can use either within Salesforce or other mechanisms, email, Slack, to deliver content and actually push it to the AEs when they need it. And I think that's kind of like the more sophisticated and more like modern way to do this type of competitive intelligence and enablement, just because it's like there is so much. And yeah, like search tools have gotten a bit better, but it's just a lot different experience if I have pushed to me, hey, we know that you just advanced your deal to proposal state. Here's the proposal template. Here's our pricing. All these kinds of things that you might need right delivered to you. That's a better way to kind of facilitate and make sure your enablement is being used. And I think there is a role for sales ops to partner with product marketing enablement to make sure that happens.
No, I think it's all back to what Vikas was saying earlier. It's that everyone's got to work together quite well. One thing I wanted both your perspectives on, we touched on a lot of different types of content, a lot of different types of, and Justin, you mentioned, hey, there's a lot of mediocre content versus a few great pieces. For someone that's just kind of getting started on this, what are some, one or two common maybe types of content or formats of content that are going to be valuable to justify the project and evolve it into a program?
I like some of the things. I'll just reiterate that I think we already covered, just to make sure, is like a understanding of the key requirements of buying any kind of platform that have your perspective. I think it's key. I really love that one because it's providing thought leadership. I do think, I think either I mentioned it, but maybe Vikas did too, which is like having some kind of like set battle card for some of your key competitors, which just sort of says like, hey, and it should be as real as possible. So make sure you test this with AE. So it should say like, here's the things they're going to say about you. Just expect it. Here's what you should say. Here's some thoughts about how you can, provide some kind of, competitive, landmines or whatever that would help to steer the conversations in your direction. And then, being able to really also be able to do a little bit of a side-by-side on key competitive or product differentiations. By the way, though, let's just be clear. You don't compete on just product alone. And that should be like very well like understood and remembered, right? Like I can't tell you like, and I will totally just give our customer success team and support team at Workato like huge accolades. Like we've literally had people say, we picked you because your customer support is so amazing. And it was just like, that won us the deal. It wasn't like the product. And so it's like, there's a lot of different ways that you can compete, and you should remember that it's not all just like, hey, our product has this feature and this doesn't, so pick us. So I guess so when you're putting these documents, to go back to your question, remember all of the competitive things that you have to offer.
I think that the point of the transparency component of that too is important, right? Understanding the edges of what you do and not trying to sell them just, oh no, we're going to build that. It's like, no, you're a solution that's built with purpose in mind. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say one other thing I think that's really important in competitive is it's so easy to get distracted by your competitors. And I think we've kind of talked about that. I love the way that Vikas and Slack talk about it is competitive where customers obsessed. But I think it's really, really important when distraction might come up with an inside the company. Hey, they're doing this. Should we go do this? Like, bring facts. That's like the best thing I can suggest is like bring facts. Be like, how big is that market? How have we competed there? How are we doing elsewhere? If, do we have, kind of extra resources to give it to that? Or are we going to be taking resources from this to give to that? What are the trade-offs, right? Like, I think it's the role of folks in sales ops and sales strategy to really kind of come to the table with that facts so that we can have those conversations, because they are really important, right? Maybe you should pivot. But without a good, solid foundation of those kind of data points and facts, then people are just sort of pontificating, and you can get into real trouble because you can pivot your strategy in a way that actually deters you from, say, like where your core market should be. So it's really up to you guys and you guys on the call to make sure you have those facts when those conversations come, because they will come.
Well, it's something that you both mentioned quite a bit when we had our prep sessions, talking about just knowing your ideal customer profile, knowing what your ideal sales motion looks like, knowing what your ideal buyer looks like. That's not easy work to do, but that helps you stay a little bit more true in this situation because of all the points that Justin made. You don't make a snap decision to change pricing or go in and dive in and go after a new market that maybe doesn't make sense, or maybe your competitor is going into that market because you're kicking their butt and the market that you're doing really, really well in. There's a couple questions, and then we're going to wrap here. First question, this one's in the chat panel here. We've talked a lot about kind of internal and understanding how a competitor is positioning against you. What are some of the best ways to bring in sort of those external sources, press releases, new hires, fundraising announcements, big companies, right? You get your 10Ks. Vikas, how do you fold that into your machine here in your motion?
Yeah, I think it's a critical part. You need to have that kind of holistic approach to capturing that competitive insight. There's great software tools out there like Clue and Crayon that we've invested in that are really helpful to kind of create that always on kind of competitive intelligence monitoring. It creates a centralized repository for us so that it's easier for folks to track that information. One of the things that we look at quite a bit is press announcements. Earnings calls are a great way to get really insightful information, et cetera. We work a lot with our PR team and our comms team to kind of bring those pieces together and create this kind of a centralized approach there. I found that centralizing information through software tools like Clue and Crayon are probably the most effective ways. It's the most scalable way too. You're able to create alerts, you're able to create updates, you're actually able to track marketing messaging on website pages that are changing over time. So as an individual, you're not the one responsible clicking into the same links over and over again. You have an automated tool to help you do that. So for me, like I think that aspect of bringing in that outside in perspective is incredibly important. The key then is balancing, okay, are these things actually fundamentally shifting their marketing strategy or their sales strategy? Or again, is it just simply noise and that we need to focus on things that are actually impacting ACV or ARR on a daily basis?
And I think that comes back to what we were saying before, right? Really knowing yourself. Where is the money going? What matters here? Another question coming in, and this is from Caleb. I love this question, Justin. Let's throw it at you here. So cool. All things being equal, right? Products are the same. How do you highlight some of those company differences? The stuff like customer success or whatever it might be. Like how do you all do it?
Yeah. So one reminder here for all of our folks that have read the Challenger sale long ago, right? And I still think a lot of what's in that book holds true, which is the data suggests that the biggest competitive differentiation in B2B sales is the value that the sales rep shows in the sales cycle, not the product, things of that nature. It's just like, do I trust this person? And do I believe that what they are telling me is a realistic, destination for us? And do I think that this company can provide value, right? So I think let's just focus there because a lot needs to be put then into, do you have compelling stories that really show that your company and your offering can provide value? That has to be done first before you get into then like, let's double click on the specific features that deliver that. Right? Because if someone's like, "Well, I don't care where you're trying to take me," then they don't even want to look at your product. So the other thing I'd say to get to some specifics though, and there's just like one interesting story is like we had a really kind of proactive prospect. And they actually mystery shopped us and they called into our customer support and they called into a bunch of others and they just experienced it. We didn't suggest that for them. They did it their own and that's kind of where they came away. But you can set up ways to get people to experience things. I mean, I think any company is always smart to show up front in sales cycles the people that they will be working with downstream, who will be supporting with them, who's going to be my customer success manager, my CS person, my things of that nature. I just think that that's just smart selling, and it does differentiate you a bit. I also think that things like understanding their objectives. Hey, Mr. and Mrs. Prospect, you seem like someone who really loves to innovate and has tons of ideas. So I think you're going to probably want to work with someone who's going to be there with you, not quarter, a couple times a quarter, but like week in and week out. They can be a partner and brainstorm things like that's who we are. That's how we want to work with. And you can show that sometimes in the sales cycle by delivering, but then also referring them to other customers, right? That, hey, this is what I'm saying. Go talk to our customers and they'll give you their own story. And then you just have to be customer obsessed, as Vikas said, so that they say good things about you.
And just to quickly add on that, I think the customer reference piece is a critical part for us here at Slack as well as building that reference edge nomination process from the reps, et cetera. one of the things that we leverage quite a bit is just customer satisfaction scores, right? Through our support team, through our customer success team, et cetera, really showcasing those metrics to our prospects during this first sales pitch, right? Highlighting to them the importance of having aligned customer success representatives to help them think through their kind of change management, their collaboration strategy, because it's a long game, right? It's not a 1 or 2 month thing. It is a multi-month, multi-quarter type initiative. And for us, that's the way we kind of bring that value differentiation to the table.
Gentlemen, I feel like we could go on for probably another hour just on that topic because there's so much selling art in there. Maybe we'll do it again soon, but we are almost at time, and I know you're both incredibly busy. But before we go, Vikas, let's start with you. One key takeaway for our audience, anything that you want them to really take home from this?
Be patient. Competitive intelligence and building a function from scratch takes time. It takes, it's a labor of love. You find the right folks, and that alignment is really, really critical. Take a crawl, walk, run approach, in my opinion. Like that is going to be the most successful way to really build a program over time. Don't jump into scaling phase too early. Find ways to get those quick wins to help build that business case. That would be my biggest key takeaway. It takes time.
Yeah.
And just
I'd say just like make sure you're nailing the core things that you have to capture early on, and that you are, I guess the other two things would be that you try as much as you can to automate and make things easy for people to do. Otherwise, they won't. And always remember the value exchange, right? Is that if you're going to ask someone and get something from them, make sure you're always usually giving them more back in return, so that they want to keep, contributing and giving you input because they see the value of what comes back to them.
Great perspective on how to think about being in an ops organization in the selling motion. And Justin, is there anything coming up that Workato's got going on? Something maybe on tax day, perhaps?
We do. We have our first ever user conference, which is going to be April 13th through the 15th. So not exactly but it will end on tax day. But this is just, look, we pride ourselves in really having a wonderful community of people who are thinking through cutting edge automations and how to make things awesome at their company. So this is just a great opportunity for all of them to get together to share learnings about how they are sort of kind of pushing the boundaries of what's possible. So we're really excited about it, and we'd love anyone and everyone to come check that out. You can find it on our website, but again, it's April 13th through the 15th. And
we'll send that out to everybody afterward. And the passes are free for MSP members, which is great. Well, Vikas, Justin, this was super awesome for me. I learned a ton, lots of notes here. I want to thank you both so much. I know you're incredibly busy. And on behalf of Gina and the team behind the scenes, the 22,000 folks in the MSP community, thank you so much for sharing your insights. Stay safe, and please have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thanks.
Thanks so much,
everyone. Bye-bye.
Take care.